One of the most repeated myths about Africa is this, that Europe arrived and Africa simply collapsed, that colonization was fast, easy, and uncontested, that Africans did not resist. None of that is true. Across the continent, African kingdoms, states, and communities fought back. Sometimes for decades, they resisted with strategy, diplomacy, alliances, intelligence networks, and armed struggle. Many of these stories were deliberately minimized, distorted, or erased. This documentary restores them. Colonial empires needed a narrative. If Africa resisted effectively, then colonization looked like violent conquest, not a civilizing mission. So, resistance was reframed as rebellion, disorder, or primitive uprisings. Acknowledging organized African resistance would expose the truth. Europe did not just walk in, it fought its way in. Before full colonization, African states already understood European intentions. Some resisted diplomatically, others militarily. The Kingdom of Congo spent years negotiating while resisting Portuguese domination. Ethiopia modernized its army to deter invasion, and the Ashanti Empire repeatedly defeated British forces. Resistance didn't begin after colonization, it began as soon as the threat appeared. One of the longest and most organized resistances in African history was led by Samory Touré. For 17 years, he fought French expansion across West Africa. His strategies were sophisticated. He used mobile warfare, strategic retreats, and even established an arms trade to acquire modern weapons. The French only defeated him after deploying overwhelming force and scorched earth tactics. This wasn't a random uprising, it was state-level warfare. And this resistance was not led by men alone. Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba fought Portuguese expansion for decades using military alliances, psychological warfare, and incredible diplomatic skill. Centuries later, Asantewaa, Queen Mother of Ijesu, led the War of the Golden Stool against British forces in 1900. She commanded armies. She mobilized resistance, and she became an enduring symbol of defiance. These stories directly contradict the gender stereotypes promoted by colonial powers. In 1896, Ethiopia did what no other African state managed at the time. It defeated a European colonial army. At the Battle of Adwa, Emperor Menelik II's forces completely crushed Italy's invasion. This incredible victory preserved Ethiopian sovereignty and inspired black resistance movements all over the world. It proved that European armies were not invincible. This victory couldn't be erased, but it was often isolated in history books to make it seem like a one-off exception. It wasn't. It was part of a much larger pattern of defiance. Not all resistance was led by kings and queens. Between 1905 and 1907, communities across German East Africa united in the Maji Maji uprising. They were fighting back against forced labor, brutal taxation, and daily colonial cruelty. The German response was devastating, leading to famine, mass death, and collective punishment. This kind of popular resistance terrified colonial authorities because it showed that discontent was widespread, not just confined to the elite. So why did many of these resistances ultimately fail? It wasn't because of weakness or lack of will, but because of a massive imbalance. Europe had industrial weaponry, global supply chains, and could bring in reinforcements from abroad. African states fought with limited resources, yet many still held out for years, even decades. Failure does not equal submission. It points to the overwhelming force they faced. And even in defeat, resistance did not end, it transformed. When armed struggle was no longer possible, it became cultural resistance, political organization, and intellectual resistance. The fight for freedom continued right into the 20th century, eventually sparking the independence movements that swept across the continent. Colonial rule never achieved true legitimacy. It survived by force, not by the consent of the governed. Africa did not surrender. It resisted in kingdoms and villages, through armies and communities, with men and women leading the charge. The erasure of this resistance was an intentional act. Recovering these stories isn't about rewriting history. It is about completing it. If this history was new to you, that's because it was never meant to be widely known. Subscribe for more documentaries restoring Africa's erased past. One truth at a time.